And so now we have the panel discussion. Our moderator this morning is Mr. Wong Koi Hin. Koi is actually a good friend of mine. He is a long-time volunteer with Humanist Society of Singapore and a sought-out speaker on technology and wellness. To quicken things up, I will immediately pass it on to Koi. Koi, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Glad that you can hear me. My name is Koi, and I'm the moderator, which means that obviously the attention will be on our three panelists today, which you have met earlier. So thank you, welcome back, Paul Hedges, Imran, and Payuma. Thank you so much. And the panel for this morning is the topic that you see right up there. Is bridging worldviews, building mutual respect and cooperation between the religious and the non-religious in an increasingly diverse society. So very relevant to what we heard earlier today from Imran, Payuma, and Dr. Hedges as well. So to start it off, I have some questions which I will proceed with. And we do have this Slido thing, which for those of you, if you can scan this as a QR code to open up a website where you can go ask any questions you might have. If for some reason the QR code doesn't work for you, you can go to slido.com and enter the numbers 4258 430. That will also bring you to the same site and you can pose your questions here. We'll have a look at your questions a bit later on. We apologize in advance that we can't cover every single question, but we will do our best. So, good morning once again, and please bear with me. First of all, I just want to say that I heard your talks this morning and they're all very inspiring. And I feel like you guys have already covered a lot of what this topic is really about. But let's see if we can deep dive a bit into some of them. So, I'm going to open with one question, which is this is suggested by somebody else. And the question is, what are some of the most common misconceptions that religious and non-religious groups have about each other, and how can we address or dispel that? Maybe I open up first to Imran. Maybe you can give that a try. And then, of course, we'll hear from Paul and Fatima.
I think I'll just give one example. One misconception that religious groups have or non-religious groups is that they don't have any form of morality. I think I mentioned that earlier. But then it also begs the question, what is defined by morality, right? Because, for example, different religions have different conceptions of morality. Because when we go to the more humanistic understanding of morality, that no killing, no murder, that is agreeable. When it comes to the minute details, then we felt that if you don't agree with my religious viewpoint that this constitutes morality, for example, how women should be dressed, then that constitutes immorality. So that's the biggest misconception. I do think that people who belongs to the non-religious category do have morality based on different philosophical traditions or ideas or arguments in their way. It's just that dialogue that happens and that people can come to a conclusion that it's just essentially a human question of what it means to be a good human being. Right? Morality does not stand on the field of religion. In fact, religion itself is genus space. It can go both ways. It can be used to justify murder. It can also be used to prevent murder and preach peace and coexistence. It's the individual human being that decides which to use. Similarly, you can have non-religious people who are also equally non-humanistic and engaged in destructive behaviors. So I don't think it's about that. It goes back to the whole Plato's question whether something is good because God says so, or something is good, therefore God enjoins you to do it, right? But I studied philosophy, and my own conclusion, personally, which you may have different views, is that morality stands on its own. In fact, morality is also distinguished from what is ethical. sometimes you can understand morality has been shaped by consensus of a particular group of people, right? So you can have different communities having different conceptions, but when it comes to the ethical question, what is good in itself for the individual as a human being, I think that brings up the discussion further. I'll just put that.
Okay. So maybe Faima, would you like to take the question?
I think, yeah, adding to that, I think one of the things is how people of religions, I think people, generally the non-religious or the secularists, will look at the religious people like they live in Harry Potter world or something, like La La Land, because, it's like we're irrational or something like that, right? I think that's there, and of course, like Imran said, the whole immoral, that thing is that. But I'll just give one example. When the cartoon of the Prophet, the Charlie Hebdo, that happened, right? A friend of mine, who's from France, a secularist as well, and we had this there was a little bit of arguments that we had, right? Like, I was trying to explain why this has a sentimental element and why I feel hurt, or he's trying to understand it. But I'm also trying to understand, how his way of reasoning with freedom of religion. But the very person was also, there was an incident in Europe about burning of Qurans, right? That very person was actually posting and condemning it as well. So I think this is where also sometimes, when you actually start having proper conversations, like you see, and in fact, and he posted even before I talked about it, like it's condemning this kind of behavior. But I think it made me appreciate, really the person, yes, the holding of that freedom of expression and the belief, but yet how the person kind of sees the need to also protect certain aspects. Obviously, the burning of the Quran may not have any effect or possibility on it, but the need to speak up on such kind of behavior. And I felt that there, even with the conflicting or different views, we had a commonality that was emerging, right? And I think that really taught me as well how we have been quite judgmental just from that one conversation, on that one incident. So I think that's also the problem. It's not just the preconceived judgments, but I think we have this general blanket of applying these judgments across all situations, and it may not be the case.
Paul, would you like to?
Yeah, I think I'll keep on this morality question, perhaps in a slightly different way. So you have a room mainly full of humanists and atheists. I think there's also an assumption that they think that the religious people are often quite immoral, that if they didn't have a book telling them not to go out and murder and rape and loot, that they would all be out doing this, and it's only this book that's stopping them doing it. And of course, for most of us, the reason we don't do this is not because of our belief system, it's because we have evolved as a social species. We will not exist if cooperation is not inbuilt into our systems. We have these sort of mirror neurons, if I use a non-technical term, that we sort of empathize with other people, we see this. And so I think if you like, again, people often talk about the golden rule across religions, this common thing, do not do unto others or do unto others as you would have them do to you. It's not because our religions have taught this, it's because as a species we can see this. And those of us who own, maybe that's the wrong word for dogs or cats that we look after them in various ways, they live alongside us. You can see that all sorts of animals, dogs, all the higher primates are incredibly moral creatures as well in various ways. Yes, they do terrible things. We probably are much worse than any of the other species. But this is part of our evolution. We've come to this because of the kind of creatures that we are. And so there's so much shared between people. I said no matter what their belief system, what country they come from. It's deep evolutionary stuff that's really behind a lot of this.
Sorry, can I just add one
Yes,
thing?
please.
For example, I look on domestic violence issues for Muslim women. Many of these men, they don't go to the Quran, and then there's in chapter An-Nisa, for example, chapter 4, that talks about the rock means to hit, right? And then after that, they read that, and then they go and beat their wives. It doesn't happen that way. They beat their wives or whatever, because of their inability to control their anger and many issues that they have to deal with. And then they find justification in the text. So it's the other way around, right? So people don't become violent because they read something from the text. And that opens up avenue for us to understand how do people actually engage in hermeneutics, in interpretation of the text, which are many, many various ways. So sometimes I do also find that people who just go direct to the text and say, see, the text says this, are engaging in the same fundamentalist way of reading the text as the extremist Muslims. So I think there needs to be a space of dialogue there.
Thank you, Ram. That's really great. So, from what I hear from you as well, it seems like a lot of this justification we use, it could be a religious text, it could be something else to justify our actions. Let's go on the next question, which I personally think is an interesting one. It's also quite a practical one, and I think I'll pose this to Fatima first. And the question is, how can religious and non-religious individuals engage in a meaningful dialogue without feeling like they must compromise their core beliefs? So I'd like to pose this to Fatima first.
I was thinking, the fact that I'm here already, probably people will think I compromised. Oh, sorry.
We're so happy you're here, really.
Test, yeah, I know, that happens. The very presence of it. Okay, I think this idea that the person, the feeling that you may compromise yourself might be problematic. Like I said, we do change with every interaction, and we should be changing with every interaction. That, I feel, is the natural order. This I don't want to compromise is egoistic for a religious and non-religious. And in both schools of thought, or both, it's just not a good human being to be that. You're so fixed in it, right? Because you're not going to be the same weight tomorrow, all, no. So I feel that's problematic, but it's also, I think, then, so what are we doing? We're dealing with egos, right? I cannot be wrong, you cannot be wrong, kind of, you cannot be. So I think we need to accept that we're dealing with egos. And how do we break down egos? I don't think it comes with rationalized discussions or debates. It comes with a relationship being formed, right? I think for me, like I said, if I were to sit down and, I need to have a conversation with a secularist, it's already a framing. I really do not. I would love to hear, do you have kids? Where do they go to school? People are saying this is a woman thing, but anyway. Where do you go to school? Do you like your mother? Oh, my mother is such a pain, that kind of thing. So that helps. I'm talking to a human being, And then I'm like, so what do you think about domestic violence, by the way? I don't think I'm going to look at treatment of women from a Muslim point of view. I'm going to apply the law. Oh, yes, the law says that. Do you think the law needs to change? And I think, so for me, sometimes in the course of the conversation, I might say or apply things that were influenced from my religious identity. That is possible. And I think that's where I can share, and the person says, I don't agree with this, this is just not working. I think that's the conversation. So people get closer that way. And hence, I do have a problem, like I said, with very agenda-specific dialogues. Let's have a conversation with the non-religious and religious. Like I said, if I'm talking about women dialogue and I choose not to come from a Muslim point of view, that's perfectly okay. So I think in trying to, of course, the need for these topics came because of the situation. So I see the validity in it. But when we're talking about relationship building, it has to start from the very basic, it's between two people. And practically that's the case, right? So I think if we kind of reorientate ourselves with every conversation that helps. Like I said, with like the example that I gave, the fact that we're talking, yes, to me it's burning a Quran, but that person is saying that this is aggressive behavior. So both of us saying it's wrong, how we look at it, but I think there was a lot of unity that I saw there, right? But had it been a topic, we've already been labeled into our categories, and I think it's very difficult to move that conversation. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Would you like to take that question?
When you invite someone to a dialogue and they say, oh no, I'm not going to compromise my faith, my typical response will be, is your faith that thin? But that's why many people won't say that. So they will say, they will not say for themselves, they say, I have a strong faith. But please, other people don't engage in interfaith dialogue because your religion might be compromised. So they project it onto others, right? So that's where the difficulty is. When people don't think for themselves and then we just hear this kind of rhetoric that, engaging in interfaith dialogue will dilute your faith and therefore they won't even enter into that space. So I think the first step is actually to make them comfortable. And I would tell them that, look, firstly, I'm also vulnerable. I'm not certain of some views. Also, by listening to you, maybe I can learn something from you. So it's that vulnerable position that you have to demonstrate first in order to see that same reaction from them, right? If both parties are just pivoting that I'm very certain of my views for both sides, then nothing will be achieved, right? That's number one. Number two, normally I will tell people that, look, when we engage in a dialogue, we don't start from a position where we have to end with an agreement, right? Then they won't enter in the first place because they don't want to concede any space at all. But of course, we have seen in the process of dialogue, people will compromise, people will adjust, people will rethink. But to get them into that space first, we have to convince them, look, the end point is not to make everyone agree. And then they will be comfortable to enter. And we see this, for example, in issues that are really very, very sensitive here in Singapore when we talk about sexual orientation, LGBTQ stuff, right? There are people with very, very strong view and say that I will not engage in a conversation with those who are pro-LGBT, right? Because that means I'm going to compromise and somehow acknowledge you, right? In your position on LGBTQ. But we've done dialogues where we start by saying, look, we are not even trying to make you meet in the center of the bridge because they feel that it's not even a bridge, We are both on different islands and I'm not going to cross over to meet you halfway. So the language has to change, right? So it's about, okay, I just want to understand your point of view, and hopefully by doing that also you also have to give space for me to explain also. So for both sides to actually be able to explain, listen, and then in that process, as a facilitator, I will see what are the learning points from moving away from a common agreement or even a consensus, which we should just throw it out of the window. That's a very bad way of starting a dialogue. To talking about common concerns. And in these dialogues I've seen, for example, people say, okay, I still have my view that homosexuality is a sin. That's fine, that's okay. You have the right to say so. That's within your space of religious freedom. But can we agree that with whatever views that we have, we should not harm another individual being? We should not engage in violence. We should not engage in discrimination in the sense that someone will lose his or her job because that person has a different sexual orientation. When it comes to all this, then they can agree, right? Because they don't want to compromise their belief, and that's fine. That's part of freedom of religion and belief. But then we agree that at least there should be a common concern when someone is being attacked physically, or someone slides into mental health issue because he or she has been kicked out of the house. People can agree at that level because they can see that they don't want that to happen to them also. So we move the conversation from a mutual interest of protecting our right, that if I want my right to exercise my belief, then it cannot be at the expense of the other group. They have the right for that also. And that can occur in interfaith dialogues, right? I mean, I may not agree with a Christian theological point of view, but they have the right to establish churches, to preach their theological views. And if that church is attacked, I might even come in protection of it as a Muslim, right? And vice versa. That is the kind of solidarity that we need, because we recognize that our freedom is contingent on the freedom of others also.
I think I would already concur.
It's not on the mic.
Something. Is that?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Try that.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I think I would concur with what Fahim and Imran have already sort of said on this in various ways. Maybe just part of the problem, if we're looking at sort of into religious dialogue, a lot of the problem is simply that stereotypes people who don't do dialogue have about it. They think that everyone in dialogue is like some sort of liberal who's seeking like some common ground, that they want to create a whole new like sort of unified religion of all of these different sort of traditions. And that's simply not what it's about. It's not whether you meet somebody to discuss, we're not trying to sort of create some new sort of worldview of religion on this. So overcoming that sort of misperception is an important sort of first step. But also, I mean, with this, there's a lot of sort of ideas that, and I think there's a question sort of on here about, sort of how do you bring in sort of more extreme people into interreligious sort of dialogues and into dialogues. It's sort of reframing what you're doing. You don't invite people into religious dialogue because already, you've got, I know who's going to sort of turn up to this, and in Singapore, we have us three on a panel. We often sit together on panels at all sorts of events. Go to interfaith events in Singapore, you'll see the same core 20, 30 people every single time. And how you sort of reach out. And I think part of it is not so people do an interfaith dialogue. So yes, and you'll sort of talk about sort of other things that sort of concern people. So I said ecology work, sort of social cohesion work, and social cohesion I said is big here. You'll bring in all sorts of people with that. There also tends to be more funding for social cohesion rather than interreligious dialogue these days. Immediately post 9/11, like interreligious dialogue, you got lots of funding. It's now switched to social cohesion work. So there's attractive aspects to that. But also, I mean, on this, there's something that's done, developed in Cambridge in the UK called scriptural reasoning, where it was mainly sort of looking at Christians, Jews, and Muslims. They come together specifically to talk about their texts together. And quite conservative people who have never gone into this dialogue come along to events like that. Because, this is about sort of scriptures. We can talk about our scriptures, we can talk about your scriptures. They're fine doing this because there's lots of reasons that you can do this. So it's about reframing these sort of conversations. I mean, if you've got some perhaps more extreme people who refuse to sort of come along all together, they don't want to sort of compromise themselves in any way, then probably psychiatry is a good place to start. If you're about your worldview, you will not compromise with anybody else on anything. You really need to go and have a good hard look at yourself in the first place. I mean, I'm not sure how much more I need to say in terms of what has already been said, so I'll leave that there.
Testing 1, 2.
Thank you. So a couple of points came quite striking to me, which is, as a humanist myself, one of the misconceptions I have very often is that religious people hold on to their beliefs very strongly, and it's something that, I'm not going to change, I'm not going to compromise. But what I'm hearing here today is that as a religious person, a person of faith, one of the things you must be willing to do is put yourself into a kind of a vulnerable position where you're willing to reflect upon your beliefs and maybe even open up to the possibility that your beliefs may change or over time or what the case may be. And the seeking of the common ground that we talk about of shifting the so-called the point of the conversation away from what I think it is and what you think it is to what we can mutually agree on that applies to both of us. And that's what's really important rather than who is right or who is wrong. So thank you so much for that wonderful response to the question. I'll go on to the next one. Testing. Oh, awesome. This one works. I'll pass it down. So let's go on to the next question. I have here, and so this is an interesting one, and this I think applies probably more to Fahima and Imran, and which is how do you respond to criticism from within your community when it comes to engaging in dialogue with those who hold different beliefs? It's obviously a related question, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that and what are the challenges you might have encountered. Fahima, let's start with you.
I thought of a whole thing about this.
Criticisms. Where do we start? Okay, so even for me, I think I'm slightly more privileged in terms of, as a Muslim woman, I think I have a family that's tolerant. And just to give some background, so the reason why Imran kept looking at me on the Jewish-Muslim thing is I am engaged in a lot of Jewish-Muslim dialogues. I'm a person who does research on Muslim society in Israel. I was in Israel in May and all that stuff, and that doesn't quite get a lot of, it's not a good time being me at the moment as well. So I've, in the past few months, I faced anti-Semitism. I've had I think as a woman, you get misogynistic comments a lot. Comments have been about how I've been sleeping around with a Jewish man and all that stuff. I mean, like, I guess, that kind of thing. So I think as a woman, I feel that the comments and insults that come are always about modesty, it's always about, the very people who are also propagating about hijab are also talking about the hijab. I've been asked to be burned in hell on that. And I always never understand exactly what am I doing wrong. I'm just, the Prophet went and had dialogue with people. I'm just doing dialogue. Who am I harming, right? I don't know. Criticisms. I think for me, I've drawn a line. For a start, I said, if you want to criticize, please start with the salam. if you don't start with the salam, you're not a good Muslim to even start criticizing me. So I've drawn some boundaries. Humor helps. But to be honest, in the past 10 months itself with the war, I've seen some people who not just criticized, but really became very hostile towards me. A few of them have sort of become, it's funny, they're very critical of me, they're very hostile towards me, but they follow all my stories, by the way. They don't want to unfollow me, for God's sake. I don't know why. They will, and they're the first to see my stories, by the way. They're the first to see, they don't unfollow me at all. But I've seen that sometimes they kind of open to a bit of dialogue. I think with some of them, I've taken a bit more tolerant view. I feel that they're a bit okay. I've engaged with some, I've shut them down. I think that's important. What's my problem, I think, is also leadership. I think there's I think within the Muslim community, there hasn't been good exemplary leadership that has set a sort of tone on how to deal with differing views. And I would say the current mufti on the LGBT thing recently, I felt that was a slightly good example for me to begin with. So he had this interview, and I tell you why it's good, right? So I may not be engaged in a pink dot or stuff like that, but a lot of people here know one of my very good Jewish friends is actually gay. So everybody knows Simon, I share about him a lot. And he's a very important person. So for me, I may not join him in Pride Shabbat, okay, but I definitely, he's someone very important, and if somebody does say anything to hurt him, I will get offended too, right? But I think for me, when a leader like Mufti puts out things that, look, the religion has all these teachings about homosexuality, but it also teaches compassion. It also teaches, other values that you can practice in this situation. What did I feel? I felt like as a leader that is setting a kind of a path where you are empowered to take a decision on how you deal with this. And I felt that generally in any of the religious communities, that kind of exemplary leadership on how we deal with differing and conflicting view is not there. And until that comes, people like us who have decided to be vocal, to decided to be here, I think we are going to deal with people who criticize, not because they have a problem, but because they don't understand. They have not been in a position. So somewhere I do take some empathy, but I think somewhere they're also projecting their own insecurities and their problems. So I think where you need to shut down, you need to shut down. Where you need to engage, you need to engage. Don't forget, these are also the people we want in the dialogue. So don't be barricading them. It's not going to work. So I do also need to engage with some of them, but that also depends on my mental strength. And like I said, again, as a woman, it becomes a bit difficult when the comments are a lot targeted on my modesty or my who am I. So it makes it very uncomfortable for me to engage. But where I can, I do. And the ecosystem around you is so important, and that's where diversity is so helpful, right? I don't think my ecosystem needs to be a strong group of Muslim people. I need some feminists who are strongly secularist. I need that. So I think the diverse ecosystem also kind of helps.
Maybe.
Yeah, firstly, I want to say that being in Singapore, there's a lot of privileges, and I can't imagine what it must be like for fellow Muslims in other parts of the world. For example, in Pakistan, right? Or in Saudi Arabia, or places where they really go after people who have been accused of heresies, people who have been accused of many things, right? Of insulting Islam. The Ahmadiyas, for example, who consider themselves as Muslims, but they're not considered Muslims by the white majority of Muslims in Pakistan. They can even utter Assalamu alaikum to another fellow Muslim because that is seen as insulting because they are not supposed to be Muslims. And people are in jail, and people have to go on exile, and some have been killed for that, right? So, but fortunately, being in Singapore, we don't have those kind of. But we do have certain challenges for people who are actually trying to challenge a bit more thinking and to call for a reform in some areas. I'll be very frank with you that I wasn't like this in the past. I was a fundamentalist Muslim. Fundamentalist in the sense that you all will go to hell. If you are not Muslim, you go to hell, right? My task is to save your soul. I think you can identify with this, some strands of Christianity, like the evangelicals. Now there is a movement of people who are from the evangelical camp. They have abandoned that position, so they call themselves ex-evangelicals. So I'm an ex-evangelical Muslim. But when I meet them, I said, hey, Imran, you're going to hell, because of your views and all that. Why don't you, come back to the fold and go to heaven with me? And I said, if you are in heaven, there'll be hell for me. Wait till this is covered, there's probably no heaven or hell. No, I think I want to share in 2008, there was an open letter sent against me, addressed to the Minister in charge of Muslim Affairs, copied to the President of the Islamic Religious Council, where I work, copied to all the basically Malay Muslim leaders here in Singapore, including the Mufti and everyone, the who's who. And it's a very small community, right? Accusing me of heresy, accusing me of trying to destroy Islam from within, because I work with the religious institution. So that was very difficult time. Yeah. So when I enter office, everyone is avoiding me. Nobody dares to talk to me. I become a pariah overnight. Yeah. But what really helped is having a community that rallies after you and call you and say, "Are you all right? Let's meet immediately. Let's meet tonight." And many of them came down. Yeah. So that really touched my heart, and I think it's important to have communities around you that can kind of buffer that those kind of attacks. Yeah, of course the attacks online, because in Singapore you don't have physical attacks and all that. The attacks online carried on, and after a while it tapered down, and then every now and then when they feel, they wake up and then they feel like, Imran, you're saying the wrong things, and then the whole thing will start. When I publish or I write something, it will be resurrected. So it has become kind of, I get used to it. It's like you've gone through the baptism of fire, then subsequently you know how to deal with it better, right? And of course, over time, people understand that many of these accusations are not true, right? It's based on certain labels that people ascribe to you, right? Like, for example, they call me a liberal Muslim. I don't even call that on myself, right? And then they understood liberal as being whatever that is in their mind or imagination. And it's got to do with politics also, because in the region, it's a contestation within Islam itself that is happening between those who call themselves as liberal Muslims against conservatives. It's happening in Indonesia, it was transported to Malaysia, and even an organization that is seen as progressive and fighting for women's equality, like Sisters in Islam, for example, is accused and have still undergoing more than a decade in the courts because of fatwa against them, declaring them as deviant on the account that they promote secularism, pluralism, and the consequence, if they lose the case in the court, is they have to shut down, and there will be blockers put on their pages, websites, and things like that. So it's a real struggle out there. But because of all this thing happening, then also I got entangled in this just by being labeled a liberal Muslim, right? So, you just have to deal with it. But what touches me is when young people come to me and say, I read your works, and it kind of helped me think through some of these issues. So that gives me a bit of comfort. And eventually people do change opinion. Maybe people are just not comfortable with new ideas that they are not familiar with, and their immediate reaction is to push away or to attack. But over time, you find that the resistance gets less and less, because I come from a space where I'm not being provocative for the sake of it, but there are certain issues that we need to talk about and we need to deal with within the Muslim community. And the faster we get to it, the better it is, because then institutions can be reformed. The religion will not become obsolete and irrelevant to people because it cannot move on with times, and it cannot change, and because it's becoming more and more oppressive. And once people realize that, then they say, okay, I see what you are trying to do, and they might even come on board with you, and they might even agree with you eventually. So I take comfort in that. And I think it's just something that any reformist in society will just have to go through.
Thank you, Imran, for the sharing. Paul, would you like to add something from a non-religious perspective?
Sure. Okay, I guess partly.
Sorry, it's on, but there's no volume.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I guess partly, there's a general sort of question sort of around here, which we kind of touched on before, about sort of people involved in dialogue sometimes being sort of separated from their community in various ways, because you'll see sort of liberal or progressive. This is a very odd thing in Singapore. Because of the way that the government manages religion here, everyone has to be involved in interreligious dialogue. So all of the key leadership are very key proponents of interreligious dialogue. And when there are big events turning up, you will see the great and the good of the religious leadership all there. One of the symbols you'll probably see around of Singapore is of the interreligious organisation. So things like sort of the F1 races sort of happening sort of quite soon. When we open sort of new train stations, when the officers pass out from sort of national service, you'll have the representatives of our 10 largest religious communities, who are also kind of like quasi the official 10 main religions of Singapore in various ways, standing there side by side, sort of doing blessings and prayers for these events, like these tens of people side by side. So there's this huge kind of performance of interreligious dialogue sort of here. But having said that, there was a lot of conservatism amongst the key leadership. So yes, people who kind of like want to push dialogue into actually learning from somebody else, this becomes sort of problematic. And these questions of openness that we've been speaking about sort of becomes a thing. And of course, then this question, like, is it actually genuinely dialogue? Do people stand on a stage, they talk alongside each other, they go back to their echo chambers? Has any dialogue in a reasonable sense taken place? And this is also a problem. Now, you've asked me to talk from a non-religious perspective, and I think I'm kind of here as a scholar to talk about this. But as well as being a scholar of religion, I'm also a theologian. I'm initiated as an Anglican, and of course, I'm an Anglican because, as the very famous scholar of the 19th century Max Muller said, it's the one church that lets you belong and believe anything you want. So I'm kind of sort of part atheist sometimes and part this. My most recent book, out 10 days ago, is called Christian Polytheism. And yes, you heard that right, Christian Polytheism. So I'm here, I'm an Anglican theologian, but basically, the Anglican theologians here will not engage me as a theologian. I can talk to them as a scholar of religion, I can talk to them about dialogue and like its practice, but they will not prefer to talk to me as a theologian in any way, shape, or form. They will not acknowledge me as existing. Basically, most of them think I'm Christian, which is maybe fair enough. But again, the last 2 days I've been in a conference with Catholics, because the paper is coming soon, as you may know, and the Catholics are very happy to engage with me as an Anglican theologian. So there's all sorts of strange kind of things that go on in these interreligious spaces and intra-religious spaces. And actually, one of the huge things I think that comes out of this, we talk a lot about interreligious dialogue. The most important one is intra-religious dialogue. To get those more conservative people on board, to persuade them that this is not scary. And of course, as you said, sort of Mohammed sort of engaged in dialogue, there's huge amounts of stuff all the way through to tradition, which sort of validates this, if you like, as a practice. To understand that you don't have all the truth. Every sort of major theologian who's Christian tradition has always sort of said this. We could be completely wrong. Well, I didn't say could be completely wrong, but sort of there's these teachings of sort of to be a negative and we don't actually sort of know the absolute. So there's all sorts of stuff in there which grounds this epistemic sort of humility. That yes, we might have something to learn from other people. That's a huge part of these traditions. But the leadership often just doesn't want to go there. Because of course, they're validated by numbers, bums on seats, and so as soon as you start to put a bit of doubt into people's minds, your finances start to go down. And a lot of this is about power and finances, rather than truth searching or anything else.
Thank you, Paul. And I just want to say thank you, Iman and Imran, for your sharing. Some of it is really quite heartfelt. And this is just my own addition to the question. So for those of us who are privileged and blessed not to face some of these really tough challenges that we do, what can the rest of us do to help you? Or is there anything we can do to make your life easier or to help along the process? Or is just something that your community has to figure out on its own and we just have to be patient?
Okay, so firstly, I think the whole world is not against us. The whole Muslim community is not against us. I mean, Didi Abdullah is Muslim, and he's not the one. The thing is, I think the voice is loud. The voice of criticism, it's a loud voice. But I've also known that it's a small group. I don't know whether the word minority makes sense. Really, it's just 1 or 2, 3 comments. I've seen people being apathetic about it when I say certain things which might sound as if it's not very halal-ish. They're quite apathetic about it. It's not really something they bother about, right? Until one guy decides to be this hero and putting up some statement against it, and then suddenly people are just like, oh, I need to kind of go with that because that's it's coming from a religious sentiment. So I don't think a lot of people are thinking about criticizing. So I think we really need to have a realistic idea that there's a few that are just loud voices that are sort of trying to present this view of the religiousness. There's a lot of apathetic people. There's also a lot of empathetic people. So there are people who have kind of said that, I know some of these 1 or 2 Muslim women who actually sort of talk about it. They won't. I think as much as I would love them to come out and be more open, like instead of dropping me a DM, it'd be nice to do it on the comment section. But I know why they wouldn't do that, right? And I guess that kind of reinforces why I guess I can, with my privileges, be the one out there making the noise. I don't need to work and stuff. So that is that. So in that case, somewhere I don't think, yes, the support systems, the friends are good, but being too reliant on it is also not. We have to know that we've taken up this work for a particular reason. And I think somewhere that burden, quite a lot of it will be on us. I do want to just sort of quickly address this one question that's at the top regarding the people who join the dialogues are least likely to join like the extremists.
You're referring now to the questions from the slide.
Yeah, there's one question that I'm dying to address.
Okay, please do. So can you maybe read out the question?
Yes, go ahead.
You go ahead. Yeah.
The people who need to join dialogues most, the extremists, are least likely to join in interfaith dialogues, often just preaching to the choir. And also the next question on, is it naive to expect to be able to critique someone's worldview without insulting them in some way? Should we prioritize tech being kind over being right? In a way, these two are related, okay? But maybe I don't want to focus on the extremists in any way. I don't have dialogue with them, so let's put them aside. What I found useful, and I'll share, so this Sunday, which is tomorrow, early morning tomorrow, I'm actually going to join evangelical charismatic Christians. They're having their service, and I'm actually going to join a bunch of young people there. I think our problem is we have this dialogue, we open the space, and we're worried why people don't come there. Instead of asking, why aren't we going to them? If they can evangelize the Christians, then go and evangelize the dialogue. I don't know. So I felt like, I'm just going to go and join a bunch of young people in this charismatic church, evangelical. I'm just very curious about you. I'm going to sit there. You can do whatever you want. I'm just going to stand there, observe you. I'm not going to do what you do. But I'm just going to be there. And I've seen that kind of open up. And I think that's the curiosity about each other, and also I think it's also maybe we need to rethink, not sit in a place fixed, wondering why people are not coming to our shop, and think about how we are going to bring the news out there. And I think that's also a thing, right? If that, we can start looking at people who are not in the room first, then maybe with time we might evolve into how do we get the fundamentalists, the extremists. I think that's a later question, but I don't even think we're doing something to bring those. And I think sometimes it does require what I said, experiential, immersive kind of approach. I have felt that by doing that, some of them have been a little bit more interested in things that we do, and they do kind of want to join some of the activities. It would be nice to be kind, but I think let's go back again, if you have established friendship good enough, I think even unkind remarks, sometimes a little bit more tolerant. So yes, sometimes you might want to make some kind of comments on verses or practice of religious that you feel like you need to say something about it, like the verses on violence or whatever, and you're struggling to say it in a sensitive way. It's going to be quite difficult. So somewhere you need to set that setting for that, either through friendship or sometimes, I feel even things like, can I say something, it might offend, some kind of that, you need to kind of tack it. But I don't think we need to be held back and restrained by, do we be too kind as well? Now what happens with kindness? The language changes. the words and the terminologies that we do. So you might actually be thinking that you're opening up the conversations, but you're restraining it. The person, especially if such a buffoon, will never understand what you're trying to say. So I think you need to balance that.
Thank you, Fahmi, Imran. And also, by the way, this is a beautiful segue into the questions that matter, which is from the floor. Imran?
Yeah, I mean, for me, criticisms are okay. And I think I welcome criticisms because it helps me to check my own blind spots and it helps me to grow and learn also. But I think there are some things that are criticisms or critiques, but there's something that are not criticisms but is an attack. So I'm okay with people, whatever ideological positions that they hold, right? You may be on the left or right spectrum, you may be liberal, conservative, or whatever you call it. We can talk and we can dialogue and we can learn from each other. We can even criticize each other. That's part and process of learning, right? Of course, there are certain red lines that you should not cross. For example, if you're on the liberal spectrum, you cannot cross the red line by advocating for violence against those who disagree with you. So I think both sides can agree on that, right? But I think criticisms should not get personal. There should not be personal attacks. And sometimes we do see a lot of that, right? People disagree, don't engage on the basis of arguments. They go on the basis of ad hominem attacks, right? I think that is totally repulsive to me, at least, right? And also sometimes I have to check myself that I don't engage in the same thing also. And if I do, then my friends, it's good to have friends also who are able to also hold you back, right? Secondly, it cannot be based on untruth. For example, right, I got this person who said, tell it to another friend, don't talk to Imran because he's liberal, very dangerous, very dangerous. Don't talk to him. And then my friend asked him, my friend is like, he's fine, what's wrong with him? Oh, because he says that after you pray, you can go and drink. I never said that. I don't engage in that. I told my friend, maybe you should tell him, no, you got it wrong. Actually, he said, you should drink first before you go and drink. Of course, I didn't say that. No. But, sometimes humor might help. Sometimes people are so hard, they're engaging in this kind of debates and all that. Sometimes you just throw one spanner through humor. I think that reduces tension a bit. But that's beside the point. People have to be fair in their arguments, in their criticisms, right? They cannot be unfair. For example, when people accuse me of many things, where is the evidence? Where do they hear it? Many of these are from secondary sources, right? They hear from someone who said this, from someone who told someone, we don't know where the ideas come from, right? And come to me direct, right? If you have something to say, come to me direct and just seek clarification. And that is something I feel a bit sad with some of my colleagues in the past, when they know that these are untruths and they are just sitting beside me. And why can't you just come to me and say, this is what I heard about you, is it true? Right? And then I can explain, right? But they don't do that. In fact, they add on to the whole conversation online, which spiraled into something that I don't even recognize myself or what they say about me, right? So it cannot also be to the point that people are just galvanizing and putting pressures. Like, for example, I had people writing in, when I was in Islamic Council, to ask me to be sacked, right? I think that's very unfair, right? I mean, you can disagree on many issues within Islam, but to mobilize people and make sure that they lose their livelihoods, pressure government to take action by making police reports, things like that, those are unfair tactics. So we have to be careful with that, and I think the solidarity needs to be on that basis, right? You may not agree with me, even as a non-Muslim or whatever you call it, right? But you can see these are injustices that we can stand together. And that's precisely what extremists are trying to do. What they're trying to do is to ring-fence the whole situation. And I've written about this in a paper in the Institute of Policy Studies. What they do is to make sure that non-Muslims don't have a voice in these internal contestations within Islam. If you're not a Muslim, you cannot talk about this, right? This is what is happening in many countries, including Malaysia, where if you're not Muslims, when we debating hudud laws, you have no space in this because you're not a Muslim. So they ring fence it so that it's easier for them to now say that, or to then control the discourse from within And of course, the progressive position is always weaker, and because it's smaller in number, it's easy for them to now say, okay, these are all heresies, deviants, and all that. And the non-Muslims cannot join in, even though they are quite a large group. And that is where interfaith work actually cuts across this. Because you may not be a Muslim, but you can comment on hudud laws because it has impact on you also, which we are seeing now, despite them claiming that this is just for Muslims. You are impacted by laws made in the land, right? Even though you are not directly impacted, but there will be some implications, right? So you should have a voice also in this. Not on the theological points also, you don't argue based on the basis of the hermeneutics and the interpretation of this and all that, but in the implementation of laws, in how society is being governed, you have a say because you are part of society also, even though you are not Muslim. And this is very, very important in certain countries, right? Of course, maybe Pepper can talk more about that later. So I think there's also this whole idea that do not see things in a binary of Muslim or Muslim. Don't see things in a binary of Muslim or non-Muslim. See ourselves as part of citizens of this land, and therefore we can engage in conversations about that. For example, when we do that for terrorism, right? You don't say, oh, this is a Muslim problem, you go and deal with it. But when a bomb blew off somewhere, it's going to affect everyone, right? So it's a common concern for all of us to speak about terrorism, right? Of all shades, whether it's Muslim or whoever is engaging in that. And my last point is that sometimes we talk about too much about tolerance, right? But tolerance cannot go into tolerating the intolerant. I think this is where liberal societies sometimes have to kind of deal with this, especially in Europe, because we are big on Enlightenment ideas of tolerance, of freedom even, but to what extent do we stop when people are claiming certain things because they are intolerant and yet they want to be accepted on the basis of others need to tolerate them, right? And this is where extremism starts to inch in and begin to expand because we have failed to see that tolerance does not include the intolerance. And this is something both Muslims, non-Muslims, every citizens have the right to engage in this kind of discourse without dividing us into different camps.
Thank you, Ram. That's a great point. And what I'm hearing from both Fahima and yourself is that we are separate communities, but at the same time, we're also part of a larger community. And so very often what we are trying to do is that we're thinking in terms of the larger community, rather than just our own community or own small little area, right? So those are extremely good points.
Sorry, can I just
yes,
add something?
yes, please do.
I think it also, so what Imran said, and this is something, and of course Imran and I were in that particular dialogue where we're talking, was related to the repeal of 377A and the LGBT thing, right? I think for me, as a Muslim, yes, there is the whole religious part. And even I'm trying to figure out how to go about it, right? But I think it's not just about the discrimination and violence, there is certain things like, although we can never agree on what this definition of a family is, but the fact that any couple of whatever natures will need the basics of, housing, right? Recognition. And I think for me, one thing, even from as a religious person, and especially as someone who's an Indian Muslim, and I'm familiar with what happens, the fact that an LGBT scene needs to be removed from a screen. Okay, yes, as a Muslim, I'm like, yeah, I don't want my kids to be exposed. That fair enough, right? But this very idea that someone's identity needs to be removed is also disturbing for me, right? So I may not have a fixed conclusion to it, but I do have, I'm trying to think on this, because who knows, maybe there might be a situation when any scene involving an Indian Muslim might be removed off the screen, right? I'm trying to reason with that on my own, and I think that is where I do see a very strong potential of these voices coming together, right? That there is someone trying to fight for a particular community, but I'm also trying to fight for a principle here. That removing identities is just something that we shouldn't allow as precedents, right? Especially when I mean removing identities, I'm not usually generally like really the grieved groups, and then things like when I said that access to, especially in terms of the signing of dependent when it's a situation of crisis and accident, right? That's not extended for gay couples, right? Because of whatever. When I'm talking about that, I think I'm trying to apply, yes, a very circular approach to it, but also for me it's a bit religious. It's about a person's life, it's about a person's shelter, which very strongly comes from me as a Muslim as well. Like, the very basic principle of don't go to sleep when a guy next to the neighbor, the brother, which someone would say is the Muslim brother, but to me it's like the neighbor is hungry. So to him, like whoever this person is, whatever the identity, whatever they are of, that they don't have house or they may not be able to sign for the sake of the partner, all this is disturbing for me, right? So I think somewhere we need to also kind of understand how sometimes these kind of principles and value really sort of integrate, confuse, and we're also trying to make sense of it. So that's where the voices can come together strongly.
Thank you, Fatima. That was great. I'd like to kind of rephrase it slightly for Paul. So as I think that's true for your part of the world as well, but we have people who are non-religious, atheists and so on and so forth, who are also very strongly opposed to any kind of dialogue or interfaith sessions with the religious people. What is your view on that? What would you say to them? What do you think is the way for us moving forward?
Okay, thank you. That's an excellent sort of way of putting this. And I think part of the question, like, if you want to convince somebody else, what is the best way to do it? You go to somebody else and say, you're wrong, I'm right, these are the facts. You're just going to come into loggerheads, but you're going to go into a defensive position, they'll stop listening and shout back. So always, even if you don't agree with where somebody else is coming from, there's probably something about them that you can relate to in various ways, which I think kind of stress identities that keep sort of coming up. You sort of brought this up, that you might be a mother, a father, a parent, you may both support the same football team or dislike this politician or whatever it is. We're not just religious or atheists. If you put it like as a trying to think, this is our identity, these monolithic brains, we have problems. Once you start thinking like you're always sort of treated with multiple identities, then you find sort of ways in. And again, you want to sort of disagree with someone. Again, I'm hearing what you're saying. I understand why you sort of said this. I appreciate that. And you don't sort of positive. Well, how about this is another way of looking at it? You don't try to assert that you're right. And I think there was a question getting into sort of questions like, do we put tact or being right first? Of course, it depends what we want to do, what the context is. And of course, often the time, just get rid of your ego, put down the fact that you think that you're right and that you're for all this sort of stuff because you're a smart sort of people say that thing. I think you like to say the smarts to like atheists sometimes sort of bad, with smarts. Put that aside, just talk to this person as another person, go out for tea, go out for coffee, don't even talk about things you want to talk about. And then you build up trust with that person. And it is a lot of that religious dialogue stuff as well. A lot of it's like really blah blah kind of stuff, is the tea and samosas, blah 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 blah, and then nothing happens. I actually hate most local interfaith work. It's so boring and mind-numbing. I want to punch people, say such stupid things. You put up with this and you get through sort of the fact of sort of people sort of doing this, and then you build friendships. And from those friendships, you have somebody you can trust, and then you can start going into difficult questions. So I don't know if this is the first time I ever sort of met sort of Muslim, and I said, okay, so you follow this guy who sort of married an 8-year-old girl, what's that about? Immediately, we have a battle on our hands. There's a huge kind of misunderstanding about that, there's all sorts of stuff. But, if there are things that bother you about sort of somebody else's tradition, I said, don't turn that first thing. Find ways into the conversation, and it may, months or years before you actually ask about what you want to ask them about. Now, of course, there's issues with that in all sorts of ways. And of course, some stuff you have to directly to propose. So going back, to the life we've seen in the UK, the Islamophobia, the anti-Semitism, all this stuff is there. I'm always a bit of talking to people. Actually, on my Facebook page, I have lots and lots of people on there who are Islamophobes, people I've been in school with, in university with. And if I saw you come to this up, I would immediately sort of go in there and say, why are you saying this? Sort of, you haven't attacked, I just don't let this have the space in public. You have to sort of go out there and post them. I have to have very few now. Islamophobes tend to be complete snowflakes. They don't like being told that they're wrong, and they all sort of defended me pretty much. But Yes, so it's not like a fight on Mars. It's not, be right or be intact, so it depends what you're doing, what the context is, as to how you're going to engage any particular person. Yes, there's a lot of sort of person skills at this. I'm not always good at this. I'm on the autistic spectrum myself, so sometimes I engage people really, really badly or come across very badly because I just mislead people or they mislead me in all sorts of ways. So this is why we need the activists who actually can talk to people normally and they're not completely crazy like myself. Because you can get out there and do this, but I think there's also space to sitting back and thinking about this in various ways.
Thank you, Paul. So as you can see, the timekeeper is prompting me that we're about to end. So we'll take one last question, and this time I'm going to open up to the floor. Choose any one question you like. There's obviously one that is next on the list. Not sure if there's a question you want to tackle, but we have time only for one. So maybe between Faima and Imran, would you like to choose one to tackle?
I'll take one on the religious scripture things.
Okay, sure. Please go ahead.
Religious scripture, 18 verses. Are we obliged to respect? Also kind of tying up, right? A lot of these people who tend to criticize or have a problem, they think they're protecting this religion. They think they're like guardians of galaxy protecting this religion. Usually, to which I say, you might hit the ground, but the religion probably would still move on. It has gone on for 1,500 years, and it's been quite diverse in how Islam has been practiced and all, right? So I think it comes from this whole savior of religion thing, and that's the problem. So for me, right, for example, okay, I'm not going to give that, but I'll just tell you how I approach it. If my husband says he wants to get married to someone, I will say, have a good day. And this is where we end. Am I disagreeing with the Islamic teaching? I don't know. I'm not okay with it. So I think, so what would be my religious way of looking at it? Firstly, I do think that if God is all-knowing, all majestic, all the everything, I don't think he's going to be limited by his own rules. If he thinks that he wants to give me the benefit of not being hurt in this process of as being with another woman, I think he would be that very merciful thing that the religious people claim to. So I'm just pretty much following the religion. When I say I'm not okay with my husband practicing polygamy, I'm not okay with it. I'm not going into, is that valid or whatever. I believe what you believe. I believe God is all-knowing, everything, he controls the world, and today he has decided to let me think this way, okay? I'm just going by the very argument, okay? So, I'm actually being very religious when I say that. So I think that's also a thing, right? I'm not okay with that. And do I have a problem with the verse? Of course I have a problem with the verse. I don't even share stuff with my siblings, actually. So, and to me it's like, yes, but if God is going to be so strict about these verses, then what's the judgment day anyway, right? So I think somewhere it's also me kind of engaging with it, re-questioning it, and also this courage to say there are some parts that don't quite tick with me. I'm not okay with it, and I don't think that it's going to make me any bad Muslim, right? If you think someone who thinks that verse is that verse is okay, and you think that it's okay to hurt people, that's religious, then like Imran said, is something wrong with the religion, that also needs to be exposed. So I think these are the ways to kind of also engage with the scripture and stuff. I don't think you need to be respecting and accepting of everything to be harmonious with yourself or not. In fact, I would think you will not see a harmony with yourself if you are trying to accept and be okay with something that is bothering you. Because even for a religious person, the truthfulness is at the very core, right? You can't claim to be religious if you're cheating God about what you agree with. Again, it's just a logical thinking into this. I think the problem is also when people try to make religious illogical, which is not. Because in order for me to even come to this idea of, oh, I believe and not believe it, that is a logical thinking process. You have to go through the reasoning. And I think that's also where religious education sometimes fails. You're told to kind of look at the scriptures, read the scriptures, understand the scriptures, but in fact, a lot of people, especially in Islam, a lot of the prophetic traditions came from a question and answering process. So I think when people stuck to the answers, what they didn't quite take along is also the questioning and answer process. People would like to call it progressive, liberal, whatever, but I think I just take the stand that I'm going to do this, I'm comfortable with it, and that just makes me a better person.
Goodbye, Imran. Any last words? 1 minute. So please take your time.
I think we are obliged, and we should respect individuals because of the fact that they are human beings. But we are not obliged to respect ideas. Because there can be very bad ideas, there can be ideas that are destructive, and we are not obliged to respect them, right? A person may hold such destructive ideas, we don't respect the ideas, but we cannot harm the individual in any violent ways just because they subscribe to those ideas. But of course, we can limit his or her right within society because it harms others also, right? So there are ways to deal with this. We respect the rights of the person or the dignity, but not the ideas. That's one. Second, I want to deal with that question about the text. Respect, yeah. So religious scriptures contain verses that promote violence, blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you a story from the early Islamic history. There was a fourth caliph, Ali bin Abi Talib, and he was engaged in a conflict and battle with Muawiyah, who was the governor of Damascus. He was about to win, but then Muawiyah called for arbitration because he knows he's going to lose, so he called for arbitration. So there's a camp within Ali that disagreed with the arbitration and told Ali that, look, you should just have finished off and then we settle this schism once and for all. Why do you agree to arbitration? So they pulled themselves out, and this became the first extremist group because then they developed a specific theology that if you don't follow what the Quran says, then you can be killed, right? Eventually they did kill Ali and they did kill Muawiyah. This group is known as the Khawarij, and sometimes scholars trace the lineage of extremist terrorist groups today to that ideology of the Khawarij. Anyway, what the Khawarij did was to tell Ali, look, you have gone against what the Quran said. Because the Quran, then they were selectively picking this verse that, if you are on the brink of victory, rely on God, God will deliver that victory, right? So you're now going against this and you're not relying on God for that victory. So you've gone against the Quran. So what Ali did was to call them, and then Ali gave the Quran to them and said, now ask whatever that you want to ask from the Quran. And then they realized and they said to Ali, look, the Quran can't speak for itself. And Ali made this point that yes, these are lines, and it's human beings who speak through those texts, right? To say that every attempt to engage with the text contains that human element of interpretation. And some Muslim scholars throughout history has dealt with the text. So when you say that, for example, scripture contains verses that promote, I think it's the individual interpreter that promote this kind of thing, because the scripture can be used to justify anything. It can go A or B, right? There are different ways of interpretation, and Muslim scholars know this. That's why if you grasp the Islamic jurisprudence very well, you make a very good lawyer. You can even argue with God, where God, he or she should put you, right? And that's why in the past, we have different fatwas. So fatwas are non-binding legal judgment or legal opinion, in fact. So you go, for example, let's say he's a scholar, right? So I say, okay, give me a fatwa on case A, and then he give a fatwa. I say, I don't like this fatwa. I can go fatwa hunting. I can go to another person and say, okay, give me a fatwa, and then this fatwa is good. Unless someone said that, okay, there's a contradiction between these two fatwa, then we bring it to the judge, which is called a qadi. That's what's in the past, right? It's non-binding. What happened is under colonialism, under British, they created problems for us because you codify it.
Yeah.
You codify it, and because of the emergence of nation state that centralized authority on the state to impose, and then that becomes a problem. Because once a fatwa is gazetted, for example, in some countries, then you will be in trouble, right? You cannot have differences of views anymore. And it becomes a site for contestations because people want now to assume that my interpretation is correct, and using power and authority of the state that is invested by the state to now impose it on everyone. And that erodes freedom of religion. That is essentially the problem. The problem is not the text. The problem is how the text has been codified to justify certain interpretations that serve certain power interests, and became part of an instrument to coerce everyone else within the country to adhere to that. That essentially is a problem. It's a problem, it's a technical problem of legislation, of law that we see. And also because when the British set up the religious court, they call it Sharia court. Sharia doesn't mean as how we understood it today in the past, right? By calling it Sharia court, because Sharia, Muslims will understand Sharia is God's will, God's law, right? So when you call it Sharia court, we remove the idea that it's humans who actually decide on these cases. I mean, the Sharia court in Singapore, for example, or the Sharia law in Singapore, it's being revised every 5 years or so, and it goes through a legislation in Parliament where the ones deciding and non-Muslims, to pass amendments and things like that. How can you call it God's law when it's in the hands of humans and it's being revised, amended every now and then? That's not God's law, right? But you call it Sharia, then everyone say that, okay, you cannot touch this. Yep. So inheritance law, all this, you cannot reform it, you cannot change because this is God's law. So that's fundamentally the problem. And when it comes to polygamy, for example, yeah, because we have developed different instruments, like for example, before you get married, you should have asked your husband to sign a marriage, this contract, that indicates that if your husband, at any point in the marriage, marries and second wife, then the marriage should be nullified. We have that. We can include that. That is to overcome this whole idea that polygamy is has to be accepted. Juries have done that, right? Juries have done that. So even ideas on polygamy also can be interpreted. Some Muslim scholars are saying that the way we understand the verse on polygamy can be understood differently, and it does not always end with the permission for polygamy. In fact, one of the rector of Al-Azhar University, a very respected scholar, Muhammad Abdul, at one time he was advocating for a ban on polygamy in Egypt. But of course, because of the pushback from the conservatives, he can't. And he's the top religious authority in Al-Azhar. He was the rector, the grand sheikh of Al-Azhar also, right? So we do have that kind of contestations. I think what complicates things is law and state. And I think the way forward is to advocate for more secular state where you have distinction and separation between religious institutions and civil institutions.
Paul, can I maybe just give some final words? You have 20 seconds.
I can say about in 20 seconds if I talk fast. I think actually, the religion and colonial legacy is important here. There's of course so much of the trouble we see around religion and non-religion in the world goes back to us as the British, because of course, I think there's like 7 countries in the world we have not invaded at some point. It's ridiculous the way we look at it. Yes, we have quantified things, like I said, in all sorts of ways. I mean, like problems of religion. Before we came along and divided it, there was an awful lot of religious coexistence because people didn't know they belonged to different religions in different boxes and couldn't sort of cross back and forth quite easily between them, with some exceptions in various places. And, again, yes, the modern world with its legal processes where everything has to be very clear and quantified. Of course, Michel Foucault was on about a lot of this, like in the 17th century, the way, ideas around sort of sexuality and madness have become sort of institutionalized in various ways. So, we've cut up things into boxes, made it sort of very rigid. And this comes back to part of the problem about today's religious sort of fundamentalism. Through most of Christian history, there have been 4 different ways of reading your scriptures. Sort of allegorically, symbolically, literally, I've forgotten the other one, that's another one as well. Which will come actually at some point. And, sort of, in fact, we've got a metaphorical sort of reading of text, and that's valid. Don't have to worry about what it literally says. And of course, if you go back to your scholastics in the medieval period, they can make the text say almost anything they wanted, all sorts of hermeneutics and thinking around this. But when we come to this very sort of literal sort of reading today, and getting back to some of the stuff that we're sort of seeing, people are not aware of the complexities of these traditions. And so today's sort of modern fundamentalists, I have to read this text sort of literally, and this tells me what to do. Well, no, that is not what your tradition has taught. And also, of course, if you want to be sort of technical, the reason why Christians have the New Testament is because the early Christians thought that these were the texts that went back to Jesus' earliest disciples. They didn't think that God had written them, that these were in sort of, could never be changed. This is just simply going back to the lineage, because there are all sorts of people teaching stuff. So there's like a historical sort of reason around this. So as we live in a day where people have got these very literalist sort of mechanistic sort of readings of stuff. So yes, sort of the modern world, colonialism has sort of given us all sorts of problems. Again, what's in the Middle East, we cut up, and I say we, the British, cut up sort of borders and sort of force people again into boxes of countries, which just don't work in all sorts of ways, and that's where a lot of sort of violence is coming from. Not because these people are Muslims and Jews, but because we've stuck people together in various ways in very problematic situations, often economically unviable, and that's of course where the violence is stemming from. I could go on for a few more hours on the lecture, but and leave it there.
Thank you, Paul. Please join me in giving the wonderful round of applause. All right, EJ. So I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Koi. Thanks, Koi, Paul, Imran, and Hima